Hi, I'm Tim. In this lesson, you'll learn how to play the first part of Beethoven's Für Elise. Before you begin, you should know some fundamental piano concepts like the names of the notes on the keyboard, how to read the notes on the staff in treble and bass clef, and how to read rhythms. If you're not familiar with these concepts, you can learn them in the basic series of lessons available in GarageBand. You can also use the glossary at the top right of the screen for more information on some of the topics covered in this lesson. Ludwig van Beethoven was a German pianist and one of the world's best-known composers. He was an extremely important figure during the transition from the classical period to the Romantic period, which took place during the early 19th century. He was one of the leading forces responsible for expanding both the form and the emotional range of music. Beethoven originally called this piece Bagatelle in A minor. A bagatelle is a short, light composition, usually for the piano. He composed the piece in 1808, but it wasn't published during his lifetime. A copy of the score was found after Beethoven's death with the words Für Elise written next to its title. In English, this means For Elise. Most theories suggest that it was dedicated to a woman he fell in love with who didn't return his affection. The entire piece has 3 large sections. In this lesson, you'll learn the first section of the piece, which is the one that most people are familiar with. This section has 3 main phrases. The first and third phrases are almost exactly the same, so we'll call them both A sections, and call the middle phrase the B section. Before you get started, go to the play chapter of this lesson and listen to this part of Für Elise all the way through, so you'll have a better idea of what you'll be learning. Beethoven wrote Für Elise in the 3/8 time signature. Like 3/4 time, 3/8 has 3 beats per measure, but each eighth note gets 1 beat instead of each quarter note. I'll play the first few measures of the piece while counting so you get the idea. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The tempo marking for Für Elise is poco moto. This means a little motion. Think of playing the piece at a moderate flowing tempo. 16th notes are used throughout the piece. While 16th notes can seem intimidating at first, they aren't really that fast since we're in a 3/8 time at a relatively slow tempo. We can count the 16th notes for the 3/8 time signature using ands in between each beat, like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. As we learn the different parts of this lesson, I'll sometimes count using ands to indicate the 16th notes, and sometimes without for an 8th note pulse. The original score for Für Elise shows that the piece should be played with the sustain pedal. Pedal markings are shown under the staff with PED, an abbreviation for pedal, at the point where the sustain pedal should be pressed, and a star at the point where the pedal is released. When you're using the sustain pedal, keep your heel on the ground and press the pedal with the front of your foot. When the pedal is being held down, change it with a quick up-down movement. The pedal is used in Für Elise to blend the sound of some of the notes together. Here's how the opening phrase of the piece sounds without the sustain pedal. And here's the same passage using the sustain pedal as Beethoven indicated. For this piece, it's important to use a quick up-down movement of the pedal so the chords don't start to blend together. This usually happens at the end of each measure. With practice, using the pedal will become second nature. Für Elise starts with a very famous 2-note figure, which moves softly between E and D sharp using your 5th and 4th fingers. Then during the rest of the opening melody, watch for the D natural, and finally finish with your first finger on A. This opening figure repeats a few times throughout the piece as a signal that the music is returning to the beginning. Play that with me one time. 1 and 2 and. The opening figure starts on the beat before the first measure. It should be played very delicately, almost like the melody is fading in, with a slight swell in the middle. It's important to keep the 16th notes rhythmically even. Play it with me again, starting as quietly as you can. 1 and 2 and. Since there's a slur over this opening melody, you should play the notes legato with a connected feeling, then gently lift with your wrist to release the A at the end of the slur, like this. Play it with me one more time, gently lifting with your wrist at the end of the slur. 1 and 2 and. From there, the melody continues. I'll play the right hand part for the first 4 measures. At the end of the opening melody, your first finger finishes on a very quiet A. The next figure starts on C with your first finger, moving up the notes of an A minor chord, finishing on a B and lifting at the end of the slur. Think about quietly sneaking the first note in, swelling through the slur, and backing down at the end. Play that with me. 1 and 2. Again. 1 and 2. The next figure is the same rhythm, starting with your first finger on E and playing up the notes of an E major chord. Watch for the accidental G sharp. And lift on the C at the end of the slur. Play that with me, keeping it quiet and the 16th notes even. 1 and 2. Again. 1 and 2. Each series of slurred notes requires you to move your hand to a new place on the keyboard. To play für Elise evenly and consistently, you need to prepare your hand for each new figure. This means that even before you lift your hand at the end of a slur, you should be anticipating your next hand position. Play the first part of the phrase with me, starting with the opening melody. 1 and 2 and. Try it one more time. Play as quietly as you can at the beginning of each figure. Swell the volume a little in the middle, and gently lift at the end of each slur. 1 and 2 and. The second half of the phrase is almost exactly the same as the first half. It starts on a low E before playing the opening melody again and finishes with a slightly different figure. Start with your first finger on the low E, then play the octave E to begin the melody as you played it before. Then play the same notes for the second figure, and play the E again, this time closing the phrase with the descending melody to end on A. Play the second half of the phrase with me, beginning with the low E. 1 and 2. Try it one more time, really backing off the last note. 1 and 2. Now play the whole phrase. Start off very quiet, giving a little swell to each group of notes. 1 and 2 and. It's a good idea to practice each of these figures separately so you can concentrate on playing them with an even rhythm. Then you can practice the right hand for the entire A section in the practice chapter of the lesson. Make sure you're comfortable with the right hand notes before you move on to learn the left hand. In the A section, the left hand part moves between the notes of two chords, A minor and E major. For the first figure, based on the A minor chord, start with your fifth finger on a low A, second finger on E, and your first finger up to the octave A. Each left-hand figure starts at the beginning of a measure. Play these three notes with me a few times, remembering to lift at the end of the slur. 1 and 2 and 3 and. For the second figure, based on the E major chord, move your hand down to play an E with your fifth finger, up to the octave E with your first finger, then cross over with your second finger to play a G sharp. Since you have to make such a large jump within the slurred group, it's important to stay low and close to the keys when you cross over. Do your best to keep these notes connected. Try it with me a few times, playing the G sharp very quietly. 1 and 2 and 3 and. When you put both of these figures together, remember to anticipate your next hand position before you finish the group you're playing. That way you can quickly move your hand into position and be ready to play the next group in rhythm. Now play back and forth between the A minor figure and the E major one. 1 and 2 and 3 and. The sustain pedal synchronizes with the left hand part, helping to blend the notes of the chord together. You should press the sustain pedal as soon as the first left hand group starts, then use the quick up-down movement at the beginning of each measure, along with the start of each left hand group. Try it with me, keeping the notes light. 1 and 2 and 3 and. When you play both hands together, the right hand and left hand alternate. Here's the A section with both hands, starting with the right hand opening melody. When one hand is playing, the other should be moving to its next position. Try playing the first part of the A section with me. Use the pedal if you feel ready. 1 and 2 and. Now let's try the entire phrase. Don't use the sustain pedal when the opening melody comes back the second time to keep the notes sounding clear. 1 and 2 and. When you play for Elise, this phrase repeats twice at the beginning. There are a lot of things to remember in this first phrase of music, and it can take some practice to get it right. Along with the notes and rhythms, play with a light touch, pay attention to each slur, and use the sustain pedal at the beginning of each left-hand group of notes. Practice the right and left-hand parts separately, and then both hands together in the practice chapter of this lesson. The first phrase of the B section of Beethoven's Für Elise has a similar rhythmic motif to the A section, but it switches to a C major tonality for the first few measures. Here's the entire phrase. For the right hand, the rhythm stays almost the same, with legato groups of 4 notes. The main difference is the last note of each group is now a dotted 8th note, so there's no rest between each group, making them sound more connected. The end of the A section finishes with your third finger on an A. To begin the B section, you need to move your hand up to start with your second finger on B. Play that with me. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. The next group starts with your first finger on G. Then reach up almost an octave to F with your 5th finger, and back down to a D. When you play this group, try to keep your first finger in place while you play the other notes. Don't play the note, but remain in position like this. It'll make it easier to find your way to the next group of notes. Play that much with me. 1 and 2. Again, 1 and 2. Since your first finger is in position on G from the previous group, just move your first finger down to F and play the same figure a whole step lower. Play it with me, leaving your first finger in position after you play the F. 1 and 2. Again, 1 and 2. The last group of the phrase repeats the same figure. Move down to start on E. Try that one. 1 and 2. Again, 1 and 2. Leave your first finger in place on the E at the end of the phrase, and you'll be ready to play the next part of the piece. Let's try the right-hand part for the first phrase of the B section. Hold the notes at the end of each slur a little longer, connecting each legato group together. 1 and 2. One more time. 1, 2. Before you move on to learn the left hand for this phrase, take some time to practice the right hand part in the practice chapter. The left-hand part for the first phrase of the B section is very similar to the left-hand part for the A section, with different chords. The first chord is a C major starting on a C with your 5th finger, to a G with your 2nd, to the octave C with your 1st. Next is a G major, using the same crossover with your 2nd finger as you played on the E chord before. Start on G with your 5th finger, up to the octave G, then cross over to the B with your 2nd finger. And the last group of the phrase is the same A minor pattern that you played in the A section. Play those three groups with me using the sustain pedal with a quick up-down motion with the first note of each group. 1, 2, 3. Again, 2, 3. Now let's try putting both hands together for this phrase. We'll take it slow. 1 and 2. And again, 1 and 2. In the practice chapter, you can use the exercises to help you learn this phrase. The ending of the B section moves back to the opening melody, with a series of E's at different places on the keyboard. This part involves some tricky fingering, where your hands end up almost on top of each other. I'll play it for you along with the opening melody as it returns to the A section. For the entire transition phrase, there's a note played on every 16th note. I'll play it for you while counting. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1. Since this phrase depends on both hands playing together, to make sense of the rhythm, we'll learn both parts at the same time. Begin with a low E, 2 octaves below middle C with your left hand 5th finger. Then move up an octave to the next E with your 1st finger. Then play the E above middle C with the 1st finger of your right hand. Play that with me a few times. 1 and 2 and 3 and. Again, 1 and 2 and 3 and. From there, your right hand plays another E, then up an octave with your 5th finger. Try it with me. 1 and 2 and 3 and. Again, 1 and 2 and 3 and. The next set of octave E's are exactly the same as the 2 E's played with your right hand, but this time the left hand plays them, so your right hand is ready to play the following set. The notation shows the left hand staff now in the treble clef. Play that with me. 1 and 2 and 3 and. Again. 1 and 2 and 3 and. Finish the series of E's with your right hand, repeating the E with your 1st finger, then up the octave. Here's the entire series of E's. Play that with me, keeping the 16th note rhythm steady. When you're comfortable with all the notes, use the sustain pedal through the entire series. 1 and 2 and 3 and. Again. 1 and 2 and 3 and. Just after the right hand finishes this series of E's, the left hand starts to suggest the opening melody again with your 3rd finger on D sharp and your 1st on E. Then your right hand plays the same thing with your 2nd and 3rd finger. Back to your left hand. Then back to your right hand, starting with your 3rd to your 5th. Then you're back to the opening melody to finish the last A section. Here's the series of slurred D sharps to E's using both hands. Play that with me at a slow tempo. Focus on using the correct fingers as you play, and don't use the sustain pedal for this part. 1 and 2. One more time. 1 and 2. Now play the whole transition phrase, starting with the low E with your left hand. Keep the rhythm steady. 2 and 3 and. Once you've learned the left and right hand parts for the first phrase of the B section, play it with the transition phrase to lead you back to the final A section. After the B section, you can end the piece with one more pass of the A section. The only difference from the first A section is that you end with an octave A in the left hand along with the last A in the right hand, like this. Elise can be played with a lot of dynamic feeling. The entire section of the piece you learned in this lesson should have a light, flowing quality. The A section starts off very quiet, which is called pianissimo. You can then contrast the quietness of the A section with a slightly louder start to the B section, medium loud, or mezzo forte. Then gradually get quieter through the B section until you're back down to a very quiet pianissimo for the final A section. Beethoven didn't intend for the piece to end here. He wrote 2 more sections that are much more challenging. If you'd like to learn some other music, you can find more piano lessons for classical and pop music in the GarageBand store. I hope you have fun.